What is going on, YouTube? Andrew Miller from Hook'emHeadlines.com. Coming back at you today with another transfer breakdown, probably the last video of the weekend. We're talking about the former Texas wide receiver and new Arizona State portal commit, Troy Omeire. It was earlier this afternoon. Omeire committed to Arizona State, posted in a tweet with some Arizona State gear on. It looks like Omeire found kind of a good connection with new wide receivers coach Rashad Samples like I said, one of the newest additions to that staff with the Sun Devils. I want to talk about what Omeire brings to the table, kind of his journey at Texas, and from what I understand about Kenny Dillingham's offense, the new head coach at Arizona State, how Omeire can fit into the picture there. Now, before I get into this, I do want to say that there's limited film out there on Omeire. I'll get into this in a moment, but, he just plagued by injuries at Texas. Always a really talented receiver, but, he took very limited reps because he was pretty much always injured. And to the same note, he's going to a situation at Arizona State where, the offense is going to be some form of what Dillingham ran at Oregon when he was OC, or Florida State when he was splitting play calling, or some type of collaborative effort with Mike Norvell. So there's going to be some gray area and a certain amount of speculation, educated guesses here in terms of how Omeire is going to fit and, kind of what he brings to the table in general. Because, again, he didn't really get on the field that much at Texas. So Omeire is originally a four-star recruit, highly touted kid out of Fort Bend, Austin High School. I believe that's in Sugar Land. At one point, he was committed to Texas A&M, ended up ultimately committing to and signing with Texas in the 2020 class. He was the highest-rated receiver in that class, had an awful lot of hype coming onto the 40. He was making plays all over the place in camp before, unfortunately, early in his true freshman campaign, he ended up suffering a season-ending knee injury. That was the first of what would be two knee injuries that would end each of Omeire's first two seasons on the 40. It wasn't really until 2022 that Omeire was even getting back to the point where he was healthy and consistently able to do somewhat even some form of something even close to full contact drills throughout an entire fall camp. And he did actually end up getting live game reps for multiple contests during the fall for Texas. And in the 2022 season, he ends up getting one catch for 9 yards, which came in the season opener against Louisiana Monroe. But it was, in general, it was just nice to see Omeire have that sort of progress, make the strides to work back from injury and even get on the field. Because, again, his first 2 years, he put a lot on display in camp. And from the clips we saw coming out of camp and kind of the buzz around his game, he was looking like one of the most impressive wideouts of any players at the position for Texas. So, he's generating a lot of buzz, and it really looked like he was going to be someone that can contribute right away, but just never came to be. I know that he was really, he had that giant brace on his knee pretty much the entire year, and he was still working his way back from those knee injuries, still trying to get back to some form of his old self or back to full speed throughout 2022. That might be the case again next offseason. Again, 2 season-ending knee injuries. Obviously, for anyone who plays sports or football or anything of the sort understands how long that can take to work back from. So that's something to note. But, yeah, anyway, how kind of Omeire ended up in the portal was, I guess first and foremost, he was never recruited by Steve Sarkisian's staff. He was originally recruited when Andre Coleman was the wide receiver. He signed when Andre Coleman, at least, was the wide receivers coach at Texas. That was under Tom Herman's staff. The first year he was on the 40, Tom Herman, that was his final season as Texas' head coach before he was fired and replaced by Sark. He had seen, I think at this point, would have been 3 different wide receivers coaches in as many years, because Texas just lost Brennan Marion, their wide receivers coach, to UNLV today. So, maybe some of those rumblings had something to do with him entering the portal, but I think a lot of it was just he needed a change of scenery. While he could have done some damage as a boundary wide receiver in Sark's offense, I he was just starting to get buried on the depth chart. And again, I think change of scenery, new spot where maybe he could get a little bit more early playing time if he is healthy next season was the right move for him. Anyway, kind of pivot here, talking about what he brings to the table, at least from my understanding of his game. I covered him a good bit throughout his recruitment, even before committing to Texas. So, in general, he is very gifted in terms of just frame, catch radius, physicality. He's not the fastest guy, straight line speed. Rarely do you see him run a 40 time under 4.55 or 4.5. And I mean, that's the knee injuries the last couple years didn't do him any favors in that regard. The vertical ability is also pretty limited. I think his vertical is somewhere in the ballpark of 31, 32 inches, at least from his time doing camp and combine measurements and tests. But those are most of the negatives surrounding his game, is just kind of that straight line speed and then the vertical. But he's got a long wingspan. He's got a 6'3" frame. Stands at about like 100, I believe it's like 185, 190 pounds. I would have to check back on that to get his latest weigh-in, but he is pretty wiry and lanky, and that contributes to him having such a great catch radius. You'll notice that. I'll put some film over this video just so y'all can get a better idea of his game, mainly coming out of high school, and then some camp clips too from his time in Texas. But you'll notice right away the way he's able to contort his body control from the time I have covered him is really, really impressive. He's able to make these sort of contortions that just don't look super natural, or like that you just don't see all that often. But it's really impressive, again, given that the vertical isn't super spectacular, neither is the straight line speed, but his short area quickness has always been something I felt was a little bit underrated. And again, I've mentioned his physicality. Those two things lead to along with the long strides, because he is so lanky, lead to this sort of separation that is hard to quantify, but really, really helps him out in some of those like intermediate and occasional deep routes. And that is something I'll get a little bit more into when I talk about his fit in Dillingham's offensive scheme. But another thing that I've mentioned is his physicality. It's something that is pretty unique for a wide receiver as wiry as him. One thing, again, that I don't think he got enough credit for is he's a pretty good downfield blocker. He's someone that's got a little bit more dog in him, where he's willing to fight a little bit harder when he's got to block for another receiver, or he's got to block for the ground game downfield. Run blocking and just in general open field blocking, downfield blocking is an important aspect for the wide receivers in Dillingham's offense. I'll mention this more later, but that's something that really caught my eye when he chose Arizona State, and I think that's one of the biggest reasons why he's a good fit. A few other parts of his game that I really do like. First and foremost, again, physicality, route timing, and just generically strong hands. He's someone that can really bring down a lot of those contested balls. When you don't have a great vertical, you have to make up for a lot of that, which is generic catch radius, which he has, strong hands, which he has, and a sort of like route timing and in-air or in-route adjustments, all of which he's got a decent feel for. I think the in-route adjustments is still probably the error in terms of those three factors for making those contested catches. I think that's the area where it can use the most work. But in general, for contested catches, he's a guy that can make some real plays on the boundary or even in the intermediate and short passing game if the situation calls for it. But yeah, those are some of the strengths in his game. I would say where he needs improvement. For one, you got to take it a little bit slow with him out of the gates. Make sure he's healthy. Make sure that his knee's just ready to go, because, again, that's just what held him back at Texas for so long. The other thing is, and while I saw him make a lot of strides in this regard, I just don't have enough film on it to say conclusively he's polished in this area of his game. But route running, he didn't have a super diverse route tree coming out of high school. A little bit limited in terms of just kind of a simple boundary receiver threat. He could make some plays deep, kind of some bump and go routes, but nothing super technically complex. You'll see that when watching his film, or if you paid attention to him in camp and combine settings. Again, I'll try to loop some of that in with this video. That's an area where I think he has made strides. You see that in certain clips, but I'm not conclusively confident enough to say that it's good yet, that it's polished, as I mentioned earlier. The other part of his game that, again, I think could use a little bit more work is his feel in other, this kind of plays off the route tree, but is his feel when he ends up in other receiver spots. Oregon plays, in terms of just having the H, X, and Z wide receivers and some of the motion concepts, it is a little bit similar to what Sark does. A lot of Dillingham's concepts are just to be able to get playmakers in space. And, that's the ultimate goal of Sark's offense. It's different the way that they ultimately accomplish those tasks, but, the means by which they try to accomplish those tasks. But, I never saw Omeire being someone that could be motioned over to come out of the slot or be, a super multiple threat coming out of the X spot. And I think, being able to be a little bit more polished on those routes and, at least be able to present a threat from those spots is going to be an important development in his game if he's going to be an impactful wide receiver in that Dillingham offense. So let me transition here, again, kind of talking about how he specifically fits and the impact I think he can make and his trajectory at Arizona State. That'll keep it to a limited degree, though, because, again, I'm someone that covers Texas, and just the generic Big 12, not Arizona State. So, by my understanding of Dillingham's offense, he just tries to run this, I hear the term thrown around a lot, up-tempo pro style. I've seen what he did at Florida State, and I watched some Oregon football, and so I have a decent understanding of, schematically and the sort of playbook he likes to run. Now, I will say my understanding is he will not be calling plays at Arizona State, that, it'll be a lot of his offensive, schemes and philosophies, but Bo Baldwin, former Cal offensive coordinator and Cal Poly head coach, will be calling the plays game in and game out. Might be something with Dillingham just trying to get his feet under him. He's a really young head coach. I think, if not the youngest, one of the youngest head coaches in the FBS this year. And with that being said, this is an offense that will incorporate a lot of RPO, a lot of simple route concepts from each of the generic wide receiver spots I mentioned earlier, the H, the X, and the Z. In terms of what that means for Omeire, I think his fit is solely as a boundary receiver. So, again, limited route tree, but there's motion concepts in this offense. Dillingham likes to use a lot of pre-snap motion. I think that's similar to Sark, but, this offense relies solely on being able to get playmakers out. I say to get playmakers out in space and to kind of keep the opposing defenses on their toes at all times, but to also maximize what you're getting out of all the skill guys. That includes tight ends. I don't need to dig too much into the offensive philosophies here, but I think all these kind of concepts are important in terms of understanding Omeire's fit from my perspective. So Omeire's role, I mentioned it earlier, is going to specifically be as a boundary receiver. Maybe he improves it if he is able to improve his route running, his route tree, kind of diversify his game there. Sure, I can maybe see him motioning over, coming out of the slot. Again, short area quickness is a strength of his game, and he's got good hands. So, if he can get some of those underneath routes, shorter concepts down, then from a technical perspective, I think that he can actually pose a threat coming out of the slot, or, maybe even being worked into the X spot, because he does actually have some capability to run. I mentioned some of those bump and go routes and deep posts. He's got some separation there, so I think the potential is there, but again, that part of his game still needs a little bit more refinement. Where, again, another thing that I've harped on is he's a really good, or maybe just a really underrated blocker, but at this point, And he's seen enough at Texas, and Texas had some pretty solid blocking wide receivers. Casey Kane is a good one. The best one, I think, Jordan Whittington. So Omeire's been able to see those guys and see the type of effort they were putting in on the outside and downfield and blocking from the wide receiver position. And so this is something that I think he will be able to do a good job with it at Arizona State. Again, that physicality in his game, I think, is something that probably stood out to Dillingham and Rashad Samples, and I think that's going to be a key factor for him. The last thing that I would really say in terms of his fit in this offense is going to be one thing that I've mentioned from time to time here, but it's similar to his short area quickness and long stride. It is really his ability to get some sort of separation, because if he's going to be able to succeed in multiple ways in this offense, be able to win some of these one-on-one battles, I mentioned contested catches, but that's going to be extremely important. I think he's going to have some advantageous matchups in the Pac-12. The Pac-12 doesn't have the most physical corners necessarily, and I don't think he's going to be getting the toughest matchups of anyone in this offense. Mind you, he's going to be starting out behind guys like Andre Johnson, Elijah Badger mainly. I would have to catch up on Arizona State's depth chart in that regard, but I don't think that Omeire is going to be thrown into these tough situations right away, and so he's going to have the opportunity to get some advantageous matchups, and he's really going to have to maximize some of the tools, some of the strengths in his game that he's got right now. Again, I mentioned separation, long strides, things like that. Ultimately, I think Omeire is going to be the type of guy that makes an impact on this offense. Probably not in 2023, but he's got at least 3 years of eligibility remaining, if you include the COVID year, and then at least one injury redshirt. And so, I think the final 2 years of his career is really where you're looking to see that trajectory take off at Arizona State. I do like the fit. I think that no matter where Omeire landed, there's still areas of his game that needs to be polished. So this fit seems pretty solid on both sides. Arizona State rebuilding a roster under Dillingham, and Omeire needing a spot where he can, at least if the knee's right, be able to compete for reps quicker than he would have been able to at Texas behind guys like Isaiah Nayor, Casey Kane, depending on if Texas gets another boundary receiver in. Might have been 2 or 3 guys he was competing with to even make it on the 2 deep. So anyway, that's pretty much it for another transfer breakdown. My name is Andrew Miller, hookemheadlines.com. I'll link below some of the coverage we're doing at the site, including quick write-up on Troy Omeire. But anyway, that is pretty much it. See ya.